value. What does that mean to you? It means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. Oftentimes, we say, this is a great dollars per cents gameplay. I'm getting a bunch of junk to store in my collection. But on the flip side of things, is it accessible? Is it depth of play what you're looking for? Well, you know what? What if it costs less and you can play it easier? 4 games today I'm going to be showing you, or at least in that definition, may be worth your while. Let's go. I mean, yeah, that's right. We've got a tableau builder, Wingspan in a box. We've got a super asymmetric, character-driven, powers crazy across the board from level 99. We've got a Radlands meets Undaunted, and we've got a freaking print and play. Yes, let's do this. So first up, we're going to talk Reforest. And when the worst part of a game is the fact that I have trouble getting out of the box and I'm ripping the little box cover, yeah, it's pretty freaking sweet. Now, I wasn't kidding about like a Wingspan style tableau builder with an earth element all kind of mixed in a box this size, right? This is not a big box. You have 90 cards here of the plants that you're going to be manipulating. You're going to be maximizing your tactical gameplay with a slight twist of strategery along the way. Everything you see in front of you, though, is exactly what you need and everything that's going to be involved in the game. 90 cards of varying plant varieties, smattering shapes and asymmetries, to mix in with some animal victory point round conditions, as well as some optional module event-based situations. And the game just goes until you kind of cycle through the deck 3 times in the 3-round situation. And it's a very clever mechanic that we'll touch on in just a second about how it changes some of the actual dynamics of these games. As an Earth or a Wingspan, you worry about the game length, right? You worry about it overstaying, but you'll see why I'm very loosely describing that. Here are your plant cards. So here you can see that I have the Ocean Spray. Upper left-hand corner is the cost, upper right-hand corner is the victory points. It gives you an ability. And so all you're going to be doing is laying this in your pyramid tableau that you kind of got to build from the bottom up adjacency-wise. 3 in the bottom, 2 in the middle, 1 on the top. And that represents these topography symbols over here that are illustrative of where this plant can grow depending on what is dark colored. So in this case, with the coastal strawberry, you can notice that it only grows on the bottom. And then also with the fireweed here, it grows in any of the 3 layers. Below that is the sun or shade, meaning this is the type of plant that it needs. So if it needs full sunlight, if you overlay something that is taller on top of it, then it actually doesn't stay face up. It gets flipped face down. And why that matters is because face up cards are going to score victory points at the end up here. Face down cards are going to be good for other conditions, but they only score 1 point that you can use later. And that also goes to the tucking of these cards, because these are the cards that you can use to discard the cost up here. Because if you're overlaying on top of one of these cards, for example, then you have to pay the cost that is in the upper left. But if it is another cost below it, you can subtract. So in this case, actually the vine maple would not cost me any to do that. And those cards you can discard from your hand or from the tucked cards like I just mentioned. The bottom of the card again gives you some of these symbols which can be used for some of the passives or the active abilities, so that are going to change up the dynamics, adjacents, reactions, when this happens, when that happens, and so on and so forth. And so then when you're building your tableau, right, you'll have 3 on the bottom here, you'll have 2 on the middle, and then you'll even have 1 on the top. And the game goes until you cycle through this draw pile. Game then is really straightforward. You're going to be doing just 1 of 2 very simple actions, one of which is just gathering cards. You're going to have a deck of them sitting next to you with a face-up market. You get to gather 2 cards into your hand to use for those resources or to overlay. However, the second action is going to be playing one of those plants to your tableau. Rinse and repeat. You go until this deck runs out. That triggers the end of round. Now, the tricky part here is that discard pile that you're going to then have by playing cards the cost-wise to get them down into your tableau, or cards that will cause you to discard cards from here, that is going to not be terribly large on a subsequent round-by-round basis, which means that, yeah, your first round might be this, but those cards that you're gathering, the cards that you still have in your hand, up to a certain hand size limit that you may have to discard down to eventually are going to end up less and less in the discard pile if you're building your tableau right and either stacking under the cards that are in your tableau or even overlaying in the same regard. So there's going to be more in here to score you more points, but there's going to be less recycling of these, which means subsequently going through this as the discard pile gets turned into the draw pile, but you do add a few between rounds because, we'll talk about this in a second, the end of round scoring, it's going to be less, it's going to be quicker, which means that subsequently the game is going to sort of speed up as a rock does rolling down the hill. And that's the main gist of it. But in the end of the rounds, you're going to have 3 animal creatures that are randomly selected at the beginning of the game that are going to just basically score a certain way for whoever has, say, the most. The most of this symbol, the most of that symbol, the most of that symbol, the most of that symbol in only the canopy, the most plants, period, the most plants in the understory, again, the most plants up top. Again, they're all just going to give you slightly different ways. Most stored energy, that's the top cards. So that is going to happen. Now, if you tie any of these, nobody wins it. It goes to the next round. So if nobody gets in the third round, well, nobody's going to get those extra victory points. You get little extra modules because, again, between these rounds, you can add them as one-time events, global events, or specific targeted events. Like if you have the player with the tallest plant in the region, you must discard it. And those can get added or subtracted depending on how you want them because they give you different environmental, well, factors that are going to change the dynamics. And the last element that goes along with this is that in order to supplement those discard piles that may be dwindling, you're going to have a certain number of cards, depending on the player count, tucked under the scoring card on a round-by-round basis. That's it. That's the game. That's it. That's it. And it freaking works. Is it perfect? No. At lower player counts, your deck is going to be reduced, and you're not going to have some of the combolicious situations of the certain types of plants that are going to play off of each other as different types of, needing many of the feather bells in order to get more points there in that guard, or more trees, or the ferns, for example, that play off of each other. You're just not going to have those. But again, it's taking a, what can I get? How can I mitigate it? And utilizing it in a very clever way. And it's doing a ton with these multi-use cards of constantly having to say, which one am I going to overlay? Did I stack one on top that's too tall? Because the variety of the heights in this is dramatic. But if you put something, again, as a potentially 10th or even 100th of a meter difference in the wrong pile at the wrong time, sort of like the game, if you will, well, it's going to screw up your later plans because you still got to do this in 3 rounds, and other people are going to be stacking and laying more accordingly, more strategically, and you may be a little SOL. So it's really a fantastic little tableau situation from a card-driven aspect. And so if this appeals to you whatsoever as something that's super easy to get to the table, not overly analysis paralysis, and really streamlined with a lot of those things or those comparisons to other games that you like in the first place, this one is a, well, you really need to try it out. Seriously though, I don't really have anything else that mimics this in such a small box portable way in my collection. And the other thing with all of these small box games, what I always worry about is that when you've got the small size, it also expands into the rule book and how people explain things. This rule book is fantastic. There is no issue, no question of clarity. And that is just, the chef's kiss, right? It shouldn't be an issue. It shouldn't be something I have to praise people for, but nowadays, so little Q&A goes into this, so when I see it, we got to call it out too. Now, if that wasn't too head-to-head thinky, take that for you, well, I have some good news for you, because we're talking a revamped Pixel Tactics. This should need no introduction. At the same time, with the hot cycle of our hobby in general, and the years since it came out, you may also not be familiar with it. This is Level 99's, well, sort of standard bearer from years ago coming back. And this is a very, again, simple, straightforward, mechanistic approach of a game. You have a card, you play a card. Now, it's slightly more nuanced in the different actions you can take, but the concept is essentially just that. You have 2 decks. The decks are completely the same. How you utilize them in an I'm better than you play style, that is the nuance and the magic of this game. So as we flip these cards over, you can see here all of the variety that is going to lead you to the question that I just mentioned, is the analysis paralysis, right? The Alchemist their attack, their defense value at the top of the card. And then you have the 4 different ways that you can play this card. And that, my friends, is the excitation, as well as the trepidation, as well as the intimidation factor that this game has more than anything else. Because if you are not well adjusted to the cards, if you have no penchant for trying to plan ahead, this game is going to fall flat for you. However, the asymmetric take that level 99 is known for is exemplified in this game as well. You have the 3 different rows representing the 3 different ways you can play this card, and then the ability as just a one-off as well. Now, I mentioned the 4 ways you can play it because the truth of it is, if you're paying close attention here, if we rotate this card around, you'll notice it changes color, but it also now has a 5th ability up here that changes the defensive health value, the attack value potentially, as well as the ability that is just your leader's ability now that goes in the center of your 3x3 grid. And so of the 7 or so actions that you're going to be dynamically taking to attack your opponent, to block your opponent, to use these, to play these down in the first place, that's what you're going to be having to try and manage, because not only is the beauty in this game putting these cards down to create your grid, to then take your small army to attack your opponent on the other side of the battlefield, but it's also dealing with your losses as well, because when they reach their death, essentially, they get flipped down as corpses. And so in your 3x3 grid, if you have these corpses, it is thematically, well, something you're going to have to deal with, because until those corpses are cleared as one of your 2 actions that you get on a turn, they're in the way. But they're also just in the way for you. Your opponent is not hindered nor harmed by them, but you lose the access to that location and the potential abilities that a character may have if you can't access it in the first place. And you're going to have to clear out that corpse in order to clean up your act and potentially get yourself back into the game. Because as long as it's not your leader, here, it really doesn't matter, because you still have quite the large smattering of cards that are going to be at your disposal. But you got to be careful, because your troops are disposable, but you still have a limited amount. And if you're not careful, you can definitely be caught on flat feet when you don't have any more that are going to be applicable, useful, or where you want to deal the depth of damage in the first place to your enemy. And there are ways to go about this, right? There's melee, there's ranged, there's cards you can put that have intercept that will go in front and not allow your opponent to jump over whatever is in the front of the line, because otherwise it is a very head-to-head, meaning, my cards are on this one and your cards are here and this one hits this one. If it's ranged, this one can hit this one. But if I have an intercept here, it can only get the first one. And so things like that, they make it clever. But they also complicate it so that if you're not trying to plan 2 or 3 steps ahead, and your opponent is, well, good night and goodbye, because, well, they're going to probably win. But that's the beauty of this game at the same time, right? The better person wins. There's randomization in what you're drawing and how many you can get and what you can do with them on the cards themselves. But realistically, this is a strategic game more than anything else. Because how you use the exact same dynamics, the exact same, well, slight asterisk there, depending on how you shuffle and draw, cards that your opponent has, you are the winner if you are better. And that feeling of triumph, rather than just, you know what, you got the lucky draw, you know what, the dice rolled your way, is fantastic. And that was what the basis of a lot of the level 99 games with these asymmetric situations, heroes, characters that you're familiar with in the Exceeds and the Battlecons, utilizes in the same regard. And so shades of that, or frankly speaking, maybe I should say the other way around, shades of this in those games are permeating throughout as you're playing along. And so the question just is, something like this, something like Mindbug, something like Summoner Wars, or even Battlecon, Exceed, any of those asymmetric, unmatched style situations is, well, this one deck, just like Innovation, it's going to be way more than enough than you're ever going to see any combination of, even with the pre-constructed. Now, give me more, construct your own symmetric decks, get a whole separate deck as a whole. It's more than you're ever going to need. But are you going to love it so much that you're going to definitely want more regardless? So now we have Montoons, right? Print and play. Yes, large stacks of print and play laminated. This is what we're talking about. Asymmetric skirmish battling, rolling right with a twist. Because not only do you King of Tokyo style use your abilities, gradually, well, power them up, scratch them off, utilize them to attack your enemy on the map in the first place as you grid-based hex move along, try and take out your enemy in multiplayer combat fashion, if you so prefer, with terrain taking effects, resource management, and gathering from the said spaces in the first place. And also, if you prefer King of Tokyo style to win with stars, you also have access to your waypoints. And your waypoint is going to be represented by, Waystone. Get it right, genius. The way to win in a pacifist manifesto, if you prefer. And herein lies the dilemma with this game, is that you hate print and playing. Arguably, though, just like all of the other print and plays that I have, it's fantastic! And it's going to be almost better than anything in your collection from a play-to-pay ratio. And that can't be understated as one of the biggest metrics I see talking about on crowdfunding especially. Well, Chris, I want to get certain amount of plays per... Chris, comparatively to a movie, this is it, folks. Put your money where your mouth is. You want a nice skirmish level, chaotic, crazy, take that with some dice mitigation, manipulation, chaos? I freaking love it. It gives me a Summoner Wars vibe in the sense you're traversing and moving your character around, but the craziness of the asymmetry that's going to go along with this. And the tricky point is just how much of that do you want? Because with the expansion, we now have the addition of several different types of monsters, additional monsters to unlock and to integrate as you're, adding them to the game, if you so choose. Because if you take a look at Tala here, for example, you can see that you're going to be gradually allocating these dice to the areas, using them for special attacks as you upgrade, fill them in, and then finally circle that to mark that you've achieved it and can utilize it. It's readied, if you will. And then the bonuses as you're gathering the resources to mitigate some of those dice rolls that you have in the first place as you simultaneously action select at the beginning of your turn. Health, keeping track of your movement, and then the speed value determining, your initiative, if you will, as you're moving across the battlefield. Higher goes better. And therein lies the dilemma, right? How much King of Tokyo in an asymmetric, and let me be clear, this is freaking asymmetric, and I love it, and it's going to give you a different dynamic. And if Mothlu right here doesn't do it for you, again, you integrate these characters into the special attack section, because essentially what you have them sitting on your board with the expansion here is next to it. And when you activate it here by the awaken, collect blah, and your movement adjacent to blah, then you get to slot them over as an additional special attack that you're going to have access to. You still may need to, utilize it. It might not be first up, smash them, crash them like you're going to want to do right away, but it's going to give you an additional layer. And if you want the flip side of things as well, you also have access to more of the awaken on the opposite side for your bonuses, which again are going to give you better bonuses as a whole for your monster. And so all of these are modular, and you just mix and match, which makes never the same experience twice, which is similar to King of Tokyo. But I mean, that's also my biggest criticism as a whole, especially with the original, vanilla version, is that, you kind of do the same thing. This is not the same thing, which is why it's a hell of a lot of fun. Now, the problem with this is if you're just randomly allocating these, sort of like any of these asymmetric games, or even like an Aeon's End, if you're me, right, you just randomly grab market stuff, you randomly grab a boss, And well, you sink or swim. And that's going to be the biggest dilemma of this, is that you're going to find some of these that aren't really your flavor or your variety in whatever form they may be. And so are you paying a lot to find that out? Because again, that's also my biggest criticism of Summoner Wars, right? Or my biggest criticism of the Yomi 2 campaign that went earlier this year. Or my favorite of favorites, sometimes Exceed. You buy a whole box and you find out that some of them just are not for you. But this is a print and play. This is a print and play. This is going to be less than the cost of shipping on any of those other things. And so if one or two of these don't work for you, don't worry about it. If you want different map variety, again, you want more poison, you want more blight to go along with this, the expansion's going to give it to you. Like somebody famously said. So that is the dilemma. Is it too crazy, chaotic dice rolling for you? Or is it just enough that you're just going to whet your appetite? Not as a game that's necessarily going to take up your whole game night, but as a game that is going to be somewhat between a filler and a entree main course 3-hour deluxeification. And so sometimes you just really want to cleanse your palate with something like this that's fun, it's crazy, and you don't take yourself too seriously with. And that is my favorite type of thing quite often. And now we're talking Line of Fire Burnt Moon. Now, it gives the shape and the dynamics of the setup in a Radlands-esque vibe with an overarching Undaunted feel in the actual gameplay. Because unlike Radlands, unlike a lot of the two-player asymmetric or even symmetric situations head-to-head where you're taking control of areas in the middle, this one is without a doubt dynamically different from its predecessors, compatriots, and counterparts. And what you've got going on here is a very interesting twist on the deck building lane battling. And it gives more of an old school, I have more than you vibe without the absolute and utter chaos and craziness that comes along with many of them nowadays. Nothing is overpowered because nothing is overpowered, as opposed to everything is overpowered, so nothing is overpowered. And as you can see set up in front of me here, I have the lanes. What you're going to be doing is acquiring from your symmetric market, similar to your opponent on a turn-by-turn, round-by-round basis, playing your cards, allocating your ROVs, deploying some personnel as well to utilize, but not to actually have staying out on the board because you're exploring a foreign planet. The personnel are only acting in ways to help the rovers in their mission. You are trying to, in this game, get control of these lanes as illustrated by flipping over the tiles to their respective color, dictating that you own it. Only one person can own a lane at a time, obviously. You are trying to get 8 of these 11 points that are possible through the 5 lanes in order to win the game, or eliminating the opponent's moss rovers on one side completely. And it's a lot trickier than it sounds. Because these rovers are going to have dynamic different actions, because how you're going to be utilizing them is completely different than anything I've utilized similarly in these head-to-head asymmetric or symmetric battling type situations, because how you actually inflict damage is completely different as well. The strategy is significant in an Undaunted sense. The tendrils of Undaunted are strewn all the way throughout this, in terms of the strategy taking a key role, randomness and luck taking a back seat, as well as having just a slight tactical maneuvering in order to mitigate along the way. Because this is a card-based initiative turn order system. And so what you're doing is you start out with a deck of cards where you're drawing up 4 cards per turn, and then utilizing them to decide how you want to play them. When you have these 4 cards, however, you're going to be looking at them and deciding, and before you do anything else, which one you actually want to just discard. And what I mean by that is that determines what your initiative is based on this upper left-hand corner number. And that means that you're each going to simultaneously do that, and then also it means that you will have the other 3 cards in order for the actions that they are going to allow you to do. And so therein lies the dilemma on a turn-by-turn basis, because not only will you have cards that you want to use but also want to go first with, but you will also be slowly, subtly integrating interference cards as a thematic incorporation as the personnel are communicating with the ROVs, the rovers, onto the moon, deploying to the lanes, deploying and moving, and the static between the communication of doing so is going to cause interference to clog up your deck to then get in the way of the amount of actions you can take on a regular basis. Now, you can slowly wean them out, but it's difficult, as you would expect, thematically incorporation there wise as well. And so oftentimes the only way that you're going to want to use this is just to get the heck out of the way by using it as your initiative and therefore potentially going second. But that is the strategy that goes into this, because the personnel that you will have options that you can manage or utilize in the lower left-hand corner here, as well as the rovers, which are, again, of about 4 different types that you will see similarities of the moving and attacking from, with different attack values, different lane values, different battle attributes, if you will, but then also a third dynamic action at the bottom, potentially, or more, that gives them a completely different way of interacting. Now, how you deploy them is also significantly different in this game. As you can see here, the 5 lanes are just open. The tricky part is, though, that you cannot have matching letters in lanes. Meaning, if we go back to these cards here for a second, you can see at the top of the rovers that they have A's and B's. And this applies to recruitment as well as you're actually placing in the lanes, because B's and A's cannot be in the same lane together. You'll notice that, again, there are similar copies, different color backgrounds, but similar copies of all of these cards. So, for example, I have multiple copies of the Moss A card. Otherwise, completely similar apart from the artwork and the background color. But why that matters, though, is set up at the beginning of every game, these symmetric decks that you are essentially attacking each other, outmaneuver your opponent, is that you are actually going to have a market that is just uniquely to your own as a deck building situation, that you are going to grab cards from as a supply to then incorporate straight into your discard pile, then to be shuffled into your deck. Now, how does that work, Chris? Well, because you're going to have cards that will allow you to bolster, say, 2 cards of the A type, you can go to the pile and choose any one of the A value cards that you may have at your disposal. I have it not set out here for more access purposes and space purposes, but you can see that all of these cards have potentially A additions as well as B additions. And so you're going to be able to choose whatever combination of A's that you want. If you want 2 A Decus, you can do that. If you want 2 A tiers, or if you want a tier and a Moss, you can do that in that regard. And some of them, like the Moss, you'll have more copies of. And this is the direct tie-in to the deployment that I just mentioned, because it is how it also is activated. Having 1 copy of a card in your deck is, well, not very helpful. Because if you're deploying, say, the Dacu to this lane, in order to actually utilize any of the actions down here at the bottom, I have to have a matching Dacu. Not a Dacu of any type, but the Dacu B in order to move, attack, fortify, or demo in those situations. And therein lies the deck building aspect. How diversified do you make it? How much do you try and winnow and utilize the ones that are out there while not getting that interference incorporation that you can eventually eliminate? Other aspect of this game of the area control. Because these areas are symmetric but asymmetric, you'll notice that the amount of points does not line up. So, for example, I might really want this lane. My opponent really wants this lane. And so the eventual dynamic of having to go head to head may not be ultimately at the beginning of the game, but it will force the issue because you need 8 of the 11 and you cannot get it without. This is not a solitaire race style. This is eventual head-to-head take that. But again, the dynamic is different. The initiative is in the upper left-hand corner. The defense is in the upper right-hand corner. The attack value, whether or not you have control of the lane, depends on how strong your attack is. You'll have Dacu cards that will potentially add values to the lanes in terms of your attack or defense, as well as the tier cards, which give an additional in the opposite. So you can see an attack a value there, a defensive value there, and then you have the ability in the green spot here to count up who has control, determining what level of attack that it actually gives. Because herein lies the other significant dynamic of how you're going to be utilizing these cards, is that when you attack, if you can meet or exceed the defensive value of a card, which again can be mitigated or improved upon by fortifications that get placed on your individual lanes, or extra cards that are in the lane, or just whatever their defensive value is, you don't actually take out the rover that's in the lane. You can use things like shocking it to make it not count in part of the total for the majority, or things like that, in order to determine, whether or not you're going to get some bonuses in that way. But the attacking is actually destroying the opponent's deck, destroying the opponent's ability to activate these cards that are out there that are the lifeblood in the first place of the varied mechanics. Because if you did not notice, at the bottom of these cards, although the top two actions of Tyr and Daku are the same, and similarly, if I pull out a Moss here as well, move and attack. But the bottom ones are where the variety and the necessity is going to come in. The control, how you actually get the lanes, which is why one of the victory conditions is if you don't have any Moth cards on the board, you can't control or utilize the action of getting control to win the game. And then you have Shock, then you have Fortify and Demo. And so all of these are going to give you different ways of interacting. But again, how this does and how this differs is that in order to activate Moss A here to get control of the lane, I have to have a similarly identical Moss A card in my hand to play it to activate a Moss A on a lane. Consequently, also, Tier A activates a Tier A. So there goes back to that bolstering of the adding to your deck from the market of, do you want to have a little bit of everything? Therein lies the mechanic of withdrawing some of these cards back to the supply after you've utilized them, or if you don't have enough of them to utilize because your opponent has been taking them out and attacking them, because herein lies the attack value issue, right? When I attack your ROV, you do not actually lose the one on the board. You lose one in order of where it may be. You lose one from your hand. Then you lose one from your discard pile. Then you lose one from the deck, winnowing down your ability to then activate the subsequent one that's out there and, well, helping you, but also maybe not allowing you to utilize that lane now if it's an A and you have a handful of Bs or want to deploy Bs to that area. And so then, and only then, if none of those three areas are available for you to remove a card from, and this is removed from the game, then you lose the one on the field. Because it is kind of just I count up my side, you count up your side, that's the majority, or I count up my side, you count up your side for control, or I count up my side, you count up your side for attack versus defense. And so it's simplistic in the actual summing and figuring out, but the deployment, the moving, the utilizing of all of these actions, because again, there are a plethora of them in the first place, of the 7 different ways you can activate the ROVs potentially, and then also the additional 8 different ways that the personnel are going to be potentially utilizable with their actions at the bottom of their cards. So there's a lot going on here, and it's symmetric. So ultimately, like I said, the best person with the best strategy is going to win. And how you dynamically go head-to-head on this is going to be completely different. Now, truth be told, this is a fantastically awesome mechanical game, and it's doing things I have not seen done with the similar concepts that we have seen before with those other games that I mentioned. At the same time, I don't like it as much as the other ones. So, if I just separate grades out here, this is an absolutely outstanding mechanical game. For me personally, it's probably going to be a B-, because it's so thinky in the Undaunted line that if that was your vibe and you wanted to have it in more of a head-to-head, just, card play driven battler, this is gonna absolutely fit you. If randomness and too much direct take that has some, you can still use things like Demo to take out your opponents. You can still shock them to cause them to be, well, disabled. It's still going to have those elements, but it is not the predominant feature, which I think as, people looking at the Undaunted line in the first place, they don't want that. And now it's giving you the ability to sort of morph into the other genres that are similar while staying true to the core system in the first place. And so for that, the excellence is there. It reminds me in a vague way of Ironwood from Mind Clash, where this is a very strategic game that its appearance may be ultimately deceiving in almost a root style manner, because if you're not expecting that, it's not going to click. But if that is what you enjoy, it's going to have it on full cylinders. My main criticism at this point, truth be told, is when you're learning this game, they give you 2 little rule books and it's split between the gameplay and the actions. There is a hell of a lot of flipping back and forth. and the minutia of how you total up the majority, how you total up the attack, how you total up control, and those things. So it's not as necessarily put together and easy to kind of navigate, even though these are really small. I mean, again, it's a small gripe. Like, I wish it was one solidified book broken down. And so the flipping back and forth, to be frank with you, was pretty annoying the first 2 games. I like the personnel action cards, but again, it doesn't tell you some of those things. It just gives you the briefest of summaries of how to actually, utilize the commands. But if you don't know some of the terminology that goes along within them, then it can still be a little bit confusing. Again, this is not going to be the Radlands type length though as well. And so if you're looking for more like, 45 minutes plus easily, this is going to be more your vibe. The Mindbug Radlands situation is definitely going to be more like, again, like your 5 to 20 minutes. So if you want more of that, or more of like an Imperial Horizons style, in the sense that the simplistic nature of the deck builder that you're used to is just not there, but the elements of the familiarity of making the deck is, this one is your vibe.